Welcome back, everyone. Today is Tuesday, October the 7th. We take a look at the overall temperature anomaly map. You can see we actually have a weak cool front, if you will, and it's dropping those temperatures ever so slightly. But considering how warm it has been across the middle part of the country, you are going to feel at least the difference today of some of those temperatures getting closer to the average, which you would typically see this time of year. And along the front, you will see some scattered showers as well. So if you take a look at the actual temperatures as of 8 a.m. this morning, yeah, it's starting to feel like fall out there across portions of the Northwest. We've even got some freezing temperatures in the mountain ranges, but the cold front is lying there into the Texas-Oklahoma Panhandle, back into the 50s there into the Oklahoma Panhandle, and then sagging through Kansas as well as into Nebraska. And it's ever slowly going to be shifting further south, and it'll be losing its punch later on this afternoon. But I do feel it actually goes through North Texas as well, but it ain't going to be much left by the time it actually gets there. But it will bring some rain showers along with it. We're not talking much, especially for those areas into Kansas, into Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle. You're going to see some elevated rains, even some higher chances, maybe some 1 to 2 inch amounts for areas into Kentucky, back into Tennessee, as well as into Indiana. Getting back into Ohio as well. Of course, Florida continues on the action of just tropical moisture inundating that region. And this out here is Hurricane Priscilla. That is going to be playing a part in at least the areas across the west, especially in the desert southwest, but that won't likely take place until late this weekend with the change coming for them. So overall, as we head into tomorrow, there is the weak front, right? Just changing the temperatures ever so slightly below average, if not closer to average temperatures, as the cold air, the cooler air, if you will only move so far south. So of course it's not going to make it into deep south Texas and much of the southeast, as well as it kind of stalls out and loses its luster. And of course the ridge of high pressure just starts to build back in as the winds will start to change directions on Thursday, as you'll get more of a southerly flow and a warmer flow, as most of the precipitation will start backing out off across the west, as the flow from Priscilla will eventually spread some tropical moisture into the desert southwest, much of California. And then we'll also have another little vorticity that's going to be inundating for those areas across the northwest, but that won't likely take place until late this week. But for today, heading into tomorrow, there's the rain chances where you're going to be seeing the most rain. Could see some isolated flooding, not out of the question. So the Weather Prediction Center does in fact have a slight risk for excessive rainfall. So portions of Tennessee, especially those areas into Kentucky, back into southern portions of Ohio, back into West Virginia, we could be looking at some 1 to 2 inch totals, maybe some isolated 3-inch spots, definitely not out of the question. And then complements of some of that Pacific moisture will be sneaking into New Mexico later on this afternoon. We'll also see an increased chance for some heavier rains across the middle portions of New Mexico. But as we head into that Wednesday afternoon, that continues to shift a little bit further off to the east, into the northeast. They definitely need the rain for areas into Maine, back into Vermont, as well as into New Hampshire. I know a lot of people are traveling up here to see all the leaf peepers are up there in the northeast, taking advantage of some of those fall colors this time of year across Vermont and New Hampshire. Is just a beautiful country up there. And further south, you will be dealing with some of those rain showers back into Pennsylvania, as well as into New Jersey. We do have some tropical moisture in the deep southern portions of the Gulf. And of course, there's Priscilla right there, still hanging on as a hurricane. In fact, it actually kind of peaks in a Category 2 hurricane, but then of course it'll weaken to a tropical storm, and then its remnants will be spreading into the desert southwest as we head into the weekend. But there is the ridge of high pressure that most of you don't want to see coming back for at least October, because yes, that definitely means sinking air and warmer conditions return after that little weak cool front. I know, guys, it wasn't much, but that's what we have right now, as Mother Nature is not cooperating and knowing that it's actually fall instead of still summer for a lot of you folks out there. But there's the ridge of high pressure locked over the desert southwest, much of Texas, and that, of course, that will just be expanding. And of course, that shifts Priscilla further off to the west, but it'll eventually sneak up into the desert southwest. But on the satellite picture, here's kind of what it looks like. We are watching another feature well out there in the tropics. The main development region has been becoming a little bit more active. It's got a 90% chance of developing. Yes, most indications will take the name, and in fact, of Jerry. And then we'll also watch another little feature in the far extreme portions of the Bay of Campeche in the southern Gulf here. And then, of course, there's Priscilla. And then, of course, you can see where the cool front lies across the middle part of the country. But if you look at the ensembles, just like most systems so far this year, yet we're going to have another named storm likely going to be named in the next day or so. We'll take the name Jerry, but this one looks to be curving out to sea as well. A lot like most of the storms this year, miss the Leeward Islands, miss most of the land masses, even in Bermuda on this one. This is going to be definitely well out in the open waters of the Atlantic. It could in fact become yet another hurricane out there, not really affecting anybody whatsoever, as well as we watching these little areas of low pressure back into the Caribbean. This is always a favorite area this time of year. Remember, I mean, we really haven't had little to nothing across the Caribbean back into the Gulf, and the waters are extremely warm. So yeah, maybe we get something. I don't know. As long as, these thunderstorms start to keep festering out there, and it will be able to help lower the pressures, but nothing in the immediate term that's going to be coming out of the Caribbean. But what's more concerning is this little feature, which is Priscilla, that will be losing its luster, spreading its remnants back into California, as well as into New Mexico, as well as into Arizona. And then we also have another little feature across the Pacific Northwest that will bring the rains into Washington and Oregon, as well as into Northern California. And eventually it'll bring down a more significant trough, but that likely won't take effect until early next week. But the rains do come back for areas of Arizona. Could in fact you see some heavier rains, maybe even some flash floodings. Definitely not out of the question for areas into Arizona, back into Utah, getting into New Mexico and the western portions of Colorado. So the areas out across west will remain unsettled. Most of the middle part of the country will remain on the dry side. And then we have a coastal low. I mean, North Carolina, across the South Carolina has been kind of inundated this year with these little tropical type features and some of the heavier rains, especially along the coast. And yet we see another one that likely takes shape. You could be seeing some flooding rains, especially the further off to the coast you live, with more of the torrential rains hanging out into the open waters of the Atlantic. But you can see the temperature anomalies as the ridge builds back, and what we've seen most of the last 4 to 6 weeks in the middle part of the country, that's where all the warmer air is, because it's very dry. It's starting to get really dry and more concerning, with fire danger starting to build across the middle part of the country, while we watching more of a significant trough and those cooler air. The cooler flow that comes off the Pacific on top of the Pacific, this little vorticity that's coming in from the northwest, that's what brings the temperature anomalies down. And of course, all the clouds and the rain that will likely be around as well, while much of the middle part of the country just heats back up, and then the winds pick up as well. That's why we're likely going to be concerned as we head into Sunday with fire risk starting to build back. Yes, fire risk, folks, because this area has been getting really dry. The drought is starting to deepen, and it's not much help anytime soon. As you increase the winds a little bit, we are going to be sparking more grass fires across areas of Texas and Oklahoma. So definitely be on the lookout for that as we head into the weekend, especially for Sunday. There's the rain amounts over the next 5 to 6 days. As through the weekend, there's the coastal low. Yes, that's what we talked about with all the heavier rains, mostly offshore, but you could still see some 1 to possibly up to 5 inch amounts, especially across the further off the coast you live. there's along the cool front, if you will, with the heavier rains, with the slight risk for excessive rainfall back into Kentucky, as well as Ohio, West Virginia, into Pennsylvania. There's your 1 to 2 inch amounts, some isolated 3-inch amounts. There's the precipitation. Complements of Priscilla remnants will spread into the desert southwest, get into the Four Corners regions, and there's the vorticity that's coming in off the west coast, especially along the areas of the coastal areas. We'll see the higher amounts, drier as you move inland, and there's the middle part of the country with bone dry conditions. All the heat building continue to expand across that region, and yes, the 90s just continue for the weekend for much of Texas back into Oklahoma. The 80s spread well north into Kansas, Missouri, back into Iowa. Not the normal October by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not really any signs of fall coming anytime soon, but we will be watching a more significant trough as we head into early next week, especially for the western regions. Complements of this deepening trough that will be digging in across the Pacific Northwest back through the Four Corners region. Of course, that will bring them more elevated rains and much cooler conditions, and actually bring the snow back into the higher elevations of the mountain regions across Montana, back into Wyoming, Idaho, into the Sierras and the Cascades as well. But that will only shift so far, as the jet stream doesn't look like it budges much from the western regions, as it kind of stalls out as the ridge will be locked over a good part of the south, even heading into next week. So heading into next week, here's the temperature anomaly map. This is a week from now, right? This is still warm, and if not hot for October standards, across a good part of the middle part of the country. Much of the central and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. continues to remain above average, if not well above average at times. There's the more significant trough that will be diving into the Pacific Northwest, back into Nevada, getting into Arizona, areas of Utah, back into Montana. That's why we're going to be seeing the mountains snows coming back. But the warm conditions, even heading into the middle October, likely continues for much of the south, central, and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. And only cooler temperatures and more fall-like temperatures in town are going to be across the areas of the Northwest, and that's where the more unsettled-like conditions and the above-average rains will lie as well, with that more troughing coming in and the remnants of those Pacific systems coming in off the west, while again, much of the central and eastern 2/3 remain on the drier side. But there's the mountain snows. This won't likely come back until early next week, but with complements of that trough and more moisture in the atmosphere, we could likely see some of the heaviest snows we've seen so far this fall. But we're talking higher elevations, right? You got to get some elevations to get some heavier snows with this type of air mass, and that's where most of it's going to lie, is 5,000 feet and above. But you could be seeing some more significant totals by early next week. So guys, I appreciate you watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update while I protect you before and after the storm.